Hey guys, it's Julian, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make hard ravey techno in the style of Regal. So I'm going to be giving away the project file and samples from this video in the description, so make sure to check that out. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because they'll be available. And let's get started. So this is the loop you heard in the intro. We're at 135 BPM, a little faster than some of the other techno stuff I've talked about on this channel. I know definitely not the fastest you could go for like a techno track, but it's a little faster, and it definitely makes us have more of like a hard driving kind of feel when it's a little bit faster like that. So the first sound we have here is this kick, which sounds like this. And so the way that I made this was basically by taking this kick sample. I'll play you the original. This sort of like 909 style kick, and then I put it through some processing. So without any of the processing going on, here's what it sounds like in this simpler. So as you can hear, it's a little bit flat sounding. But what I have in here is that's making it sound kind of different from that is I have this pitch envelope. And so what this pitch envelope is doing is it's adding a little bit of a pitch envelope at the start of the sound. But if you don't know what that means, basically a pitch envelope is like adding like an amplitude envelope where it starts at this point and then goes down to there. It's doing that but with the pitch. So you start at a high point and go down to a low point. And if you do it really quick at the start of a sound like I've done here, it can add that sort of like impact to the sound. So that's what I've got there. The only other thing I did in the simpler here was I just sort of used the amplitude envelope to shape it a little bit. I'll get into that more when we get through the processing, because that's kind of more like having to do with what's going on later. Anyway, the next thing I have here is this audio effect track, which sounds like this. So although it's very quiet, you can hear this is what's doing the rumble. So basically what we have is I have two chains. I've got this dry chain, and then I've got this wet chain. And inside of the wet chain, what we have, you can see it's turned down a little bit from the dry chain. But in the wet chain, what we've got is first I have the simple delay. So the simple delay is what's doing that, like, that. It's doing that. This is basically the same kind of principle as making like a techno reverb kick, but it's more of like a driving kind of sound because I use the delay here. So after that delay, then I have a little bit of this amp here. You can see I've got the gain turned up a bit and I've turned the bass up a bit. That's what's making it kind of like deep and like more rumbly. Like here's what it sounds like just coming out of the simple delay, as a matter of fact. So that doesn't really have a lot of low end, but then this amp, you can hear it's like bringing out that low end and really making it like rumbly and deep. And then after that, we have this auto filter. And so what the auto filter is doing is it's just honing in or focusing in on that one range where all that rumble is happening. And there you go. Then we blend that with the dry kick, and you get a pretty nice rumbly kick. And this is, again, a little bit different from the usual one, because usually it would be like a reverb kick or something like that. But something I noticed in Regal's tracks, like Still Raving, he definitely did the kick this way. Yeah, I think it's this delay kick as opposed to the reverb where, again, you just get more of like a driving kind of like 16 notes as opposed to just like a long reverb. So the only other thing that I have at the end of the chain there before I move forward is this auto pan. And all this is doing is it's just getting rid of that first repeat. If I turn it off, you can hear. You can also still hear there's a repeat that's playing on the same notes that the kick is hitting on. Like, what I want with this is for it just to be playing when the kick isn't playing. But as you can hear, it still does play all four of those 16th notes. So, to get rid of that, I added this auto pan here. And then all it's doing is it's just doing this sort of quarter note pulse where it cuts out that one note that's playing when the kick is playing. But then you still get the three other 16th notes after that. So that is how I did the sort of like rumble for this kick. The next effect I have on here is this limiter, and that sounds like this. This is really bringing like everything up. It's compressing it quite a bit. You can see it's not super dynamic, but I think it works really well for the style. It's a really good technique. I use this making all kinds of different techno kicks. Like, it's really good to just put at the end of the chain, because as you can hear, a lot of times when you just do this stuff, like, that's really not hitting. And even if we just turn the gain up a bunch, like, it's not, like, as powerful as you really want. So adding this limiter is just, like, something really extreme at the end of the chain that really helps to sort of pull it all together. Then after that, the last thing I've got on here is this drum bus, which sounds like this. And those are just doing kind of like the final like power stuff. Basically, I've turned the crunch all the way off, transients at 0. I've got the dampen all the way up. I've got a little bit of boom. I'll talk about that in a sec. And then I've got this drive here. So the drive is what's really adding the power. And then this boom is just kind of adding some low end like deepness to the sound. If I turn it off, it's just not quite as deep and powerful. And yeah, and then the key with that is just to tune it. So this track is in C minor. You'll see when I get to the synths. It's in C minor, so I just tuned this to C. Pretty simple there. So that's really it for the kick. Like I said, it's just a matter of finding kind of like a punchy sample or like a 909 kind of like classic, more like rave style kick. And then just taking it and kind of like working with that and making the kick from there. So then the next thing I have here is this little operator percussion thing, which sounds like this. You can hear it's just playing on the upbeats there. So this is something I heard in Still Raving that I wanted to point out because I think it's an important thing to know for like your own producing. So basically, if you don't know, the hi-hats in this track and in Still Raving as well, and a few of Regal's other tracks are basically set up like this. It's like some 909 hi-hats. And then there's this thing over top. And what this thing is doing is it's adding like a lot more depth to the beat. It's kind of like ear candy. Like, it's not super, super in your face. But it's just kind of like that extra little percussion that is almost like background percussion, but it's very important because, again, it's adding like ear candy. It's adding more depth to the beat. It's making it just that much more interesting, and it's more than just like a kick and some hi-hats and a 303 and a pad. So the way that I made this sound was, I'll show you the programming. So like I said, it's just playing on the upbeats, and then I have some white noise here, which is set like this. I've got the amplitude envelope kind of shortening it, and then I've got that going into a bandpass filter, and the bandpass filter just has a bunch of resonance, and then I've got the frequency set there, so that's kind of how we're shaping it. The resonance is what's creating that tone that you hear. So then after that, I've got this echo, which is set like this. I've just got 16th notes, really simple. It just adds a bit of space to it because you don't really want just like that. I mean, I guess that's kind of cool in some ways, but the echo makes it a lot more smooth. So then after that, I just have a little bit of drum bus. You can see I turned the transients up a little bit, and I've got the crunch up a little bit, and I've got the drive up a little bit. Kind of similar to the kick. This is just sort of tying it all together at the end there. So then the next thing we have here are these hi-hats, which sound like this. So all these are just these basic 909 hi-hats. I've got a closed one and an open one. Pretty straightforward kind of techno sounds there. Nothing really too crazy. I put them into this little drum rack, and then it's just playing this fast like 16th note pattern. And then I've got a bit of processing on that. So the first thing I have is the saturator, which you can see is set like this. So I've just got a bit of drive. You can hear this just really helps like bring these out. It's kind of similar to the way I was using the drum bus on the kick and that last little percussive sound. Like, you know, just the extra little 10% stuff like this that really adds that much more to your tracks. And you can hear like, yeah, I feel like it just really brings those out nicely without doing any like compression or weird limiting or anything like that. So then after that, I've got this EQ8, which is set like this. I'm just cutting out a bunch of low end just to make some room for everything else. And then I boosted the high end a little bit because these are kind of like the main thing that's really in like the high end like that. Like, I'm talking about like these frequencies, like where that little bump is. Like, that's really the only thing that's got that kind of stuff going on in this track, and those frequencies are very important. I think very often they're neglected, so yeah, I just kind of add that little boost to kind of bring them out more. And the last thing I have on here is the Haas effect. So if you don't know what the Haas effect is, it's a really simple kind of like stereo effect. Basically what you do is you split the sound into the left and right signal, and then as I've done here, and I'll explain in a sec, and then you take one of them, in this case I use the left ear, and just move it that much, like a little bit forward, so it's happening slightly after the other ear. And then what happens is you're hearing these very close, but at different times, so it creates like this big stereo image in your brain, if that makes any sense. So the way I did this here was using an audio effect rack. I've just got two chains. I've got the left one, which has a simple delay on it, and then I've got the right one, which is dry, and then the simple delay is just what I'm using to do the effect. So I've got the dry wet all the way up. I've got it in mono mode, meaning the two ears are linked. And then I've got the feedback all the way down. And then, yeah, this is literally just moving it forward a certain amount of milliseconds, in this case, 9. And there you go. So this is kind of another thing with this. Like, there just weren't a lot of, like, big stereo things in this. So I wanted to have something that was really wide. So that was why I split those and did all that. So the next sound we have here is a 303, which sounds like this. So the way I made this was using analog. I've got 2 saw waves, pretty simple, just going into a low pass filter, which you can see is set like this. I've got the frequency set there, I've got the resonance pretty high. It's bringing out the kind of like 303 texture in it without being too much. And then on that filter, I've got a bit of an envelope. You can see it's kind of set like this, pretty short decay time. You don't want the decay to be too long, because it'll get kind of messy like that, and then it just doesn't really have that like punchy, tight sound. And then the other thing I have on there is key tracking. So if you don't know what key tracking is, it's basically like key tracking. Think of it like the way you have an oscillator set up. Like when you play one of these saw waves, for example, if you play a low C, it's going to play a low C. If you play a high A, it's going to play a high A. Same thing with key tracking on a filter. It's just setting it so wherever you are on the keyboard, the sort of like the lower you are on the keyboard, the lower the frequency on the filter will be, and the higher you are on the keyboard, the higher the frequency on the filter will be. So it's kind of cool here because you can see it's got this pattern where it sort of jumps up. This is just a really simple C minor kind of thing. It's just playing C, and then D sharp, the third, and then that little C sharp there, kind of like a dark note. But yeah, it's really simple, but since this jumps up an octave there, you kind of get like that. It makes it kind of stand out a little bit more with that key tracking versus when I turn it off. Like, it just kind of sounds like the same thing. So yeah, and also I'll show you the notes while I'm talking about this. It's really simple. It's just playing the 16th note, kind of like pulsing pattern, and then I have those simple jumps up, I guess. Really nothing too crazy here. Like, these aren't too difficult to write. But that is the pattern there. So then for the only other things I have in analog here is actually just this amplitude envelope, which is set like this. So just kind of like a tight pluck. Pretty simple. So then after that, I have this first effect here, which is a flanger, which is set like this. I've got no modulation, and it's just doing like kind of like a filtering type effect. This is just to kind of bring a little bit of a different texture out of these saw waves. I've talked about this a little bit recently on my channel, but a lot of times, like when you just use a saw wave or a square wave out of analog or any synth, it can sound very like dry and flat. So I like using like phasers and flangers and stuff like that with no modulation, sort of just as like a cool way to filter it and give it kind of a different vibe. Then after that, I've got the saturator, which is set like this. You can see I've got the drive up a bit, and then I've got the color on the soft sine mode. So if I turn that off and on, you can hear it. It's really impacting the sound. Like, it's kind of cleaning it up a little bit and making it more just sort of like mid-rangey as opposed to like kind of low mid, see if that makes any sense. So then after that, I've got this drum bus. It's set like this. I've got quite a bit of drive, quite a bit of crunch. And then I have the transients at -1, so it's basically just cutting it back to make it really tight. This is really useful because, like I was saying before, if this is too long, the notes can be kind of messy and they can kind of bleed into each other, but if you tighten it up with like a transient shaper like this, can make it a bit cleaner. And then I like using drum bus to distort synths like this as well. Like, it's just kind of a nice way to give it that like really crunchy kind of like analog sound. So then after that, I've got an OTT, which is just set like this. You can see I've got the amount at 70% and I've got the time at 1,000. So this is just making it so it's not doing any weird timing things. Again, I didn't want this to be too like long like that. So yeah, that just makes it so it's only affecting the sound totally and it's not messing with the time. And then I've got the amount set like this. So I just kind of have it at 70%. It lets a little bit of the dry signal through without letting through like too much. Like, I didn't really want to use this. This isn't really the sound I was going for, but I also didn't want just completely that because it's a bit thin sounding. So yeah, just kind of blending it in there is key. So then after that, I've got this auto pen, which is set like this. I'm using it for a sort of fake sidechain thing. I've got it on quarter notes, and then we've got it on the phase on 0, so it's doing mono, meaning it's just affecting the volume. Then I've got the waveform set to the saw wave, and I've got that inverted. So yeah, it's just sort of creating the sidechain pulse, because obviously you wouldn't want to sidechain it to that kick. So then after that, I've just got an EQ8. It's cutting out the low end, boosting a bit of mids, and boosting a bit of high end. Just kind of like doing some final cleanup polish work on the sound. And that's the 303. So then the final sound we have here is this pad, which sounds like this. So the way I made this was using analog. We've got 2 saw waves. You can see I've got the first one detuned a little bit. Those are just going into a high pass filter, which is cutting out a bunch of that low end and making it kind of more like smooth. Then I've got the amplitude envelope set like this, just kind of like one long note, I guess. After that, I've got a bit of vibrato. It's pretty fast, and I've got a pretty high amount actually. That's giving it that like sort of warbly sound, and then I've got a bit of unison, and that's it for what I've got inside of analog. Then after that, I've got this chorus, which is set like this. You can see the amount is all the way up, but I don't have that much dry wet, so it's just kind of adding some chorusy dimension to the sound. Then we've got an EQ8 cutting out the low end. This is kind of like expanding on what I was doing with the high pass filter. I just really wanted this to mostly be like high end, so I just cut that right there in the chain. Then after that, I've got a bit of echo. It's set like this. Pretty simple. I just turned the dry wet down a bit, really, just to give it some space. But yeah, I like using echo, and then for these kind of sounds, like I really like how you get those cascading echoes. I feel like it adds a lot of sort of color and texture to the sound. Then after that, I've got a bit of reverb, just adding a bit more space. You can see the K time's pretty high. Then I have a Haas effect, very similar, or just exactly the same as the one that I showed you on the hi-hats before. And then finally, I just have an auto pan, just like the one that was on the 303, doing a sort of fake side chain. And then this chord, it's literally just playing a C minor the whole time through. There's just kind of like a drone that sits underneath everything. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for this one. I got a few requests for this tutorial, and I wanted to show you guys how to do this because I know the style is very popular right now, and I'm a big fan of it as well. So that's me for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And while you're at it, in the description, you can also get the project file and samples and MIDI presets from this video for free. So make sure to check that out. If you're a patron on my Patreon, they'll be available there for you. Thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.